SNP ministers have been shamed into finally ordering a grooming gangs inquiry amid fury about them resisting calls for the past year. Education Secretary Jenny Gilruth revealed a major U-turn and announced a statutory probe into organised child sex abuse in Scotland. Despite a series of high-profile crimes, Ms Gilruth said there remains limited evidence of widespread grooming gangs across Scotland, but she acknowledged institutions may have swept it under the carpet and said she's not willing to wait for the results of an ongoing police review before establishing a full-scale inquiry. Survivors told her stories that were shocking and extreme, but they were not believed by the people they approached for help, she said.
I confirmed to Parliament today of my intention to establish a statutory public inquiry under the Inquiries Act 2005. This public inquiry will consider directly Scotland's response to group-based child sexual abuse and exploitation. There is a perception that institutions act defensively to protect organisational reputations rather than to prioritise truth-seeking or accountability. This has been a consistent theme in my discussion with survivors. All too often, when victims spoke up, institutions knew. And institutions with the powers to act and, importantly, the powers to help, all too often did not act to prevent abuse from occurring.
In 2020, it was revealed police kept secret a huge asylum seeker grooming gang in Glasgow, which had at least 44 victims. All the perpetrators were asylum seekers from Kurdish, Afghani, Egyptian, Moroccan, Turkish, Pakistani or Iraqi communities. The inquiry will be led by Professor Alexis Jay, who conducted a probe into the Rotherham scandal, where at least 1,400 children were sexually abused by men, predominantly of Pakistani heritage. She detailed how girls as young as 11 were raped, trafficked, abducted, beaten and intimidated. She also led the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse in England and Wales, which found an epidemic of widespread harm that left thousands of victims in its poisonous wake. Justice Secretary Angela Constant sparked fury last year when she falsely suggested Professor Jay opposed a Scots grooming gangs inquiry. That scandal led to Ms Constance being found to have broken the ministerial code, but John Swinney kept her in post regardless.
So has John Swinney also realised that she cannot possibly oversee this review? And does that not show that he's also lost confidence in his own Justice Secretary?
First Minister.
No, that is not the case.
The Tories tried to compel an inquiry into legislation in September and pushed again in November when Scottish Tory leader Russell Finlay raised the case of an anonymous woman known as Taylor at First Minister's questions.
Well, John Swinney says he's satisfied, but victims have no faith in this government and no faith in this Justice Secretary. The mother of Taylor, who was gang raped as a child in care, told me that there is, quote, no substance to anything that Angela Constance says, and that, and I quote, she cannot oversee anything.
She had written to Mr Swinney telling him of sexual abuse she and friends had suffered at the hands of a gang of Pakistani men in Glasgow when she was 13 years old. Taylor, now in her 20s, said she and her pals had been plied with drugs and alcohol, and it was clear similar abuse is still ongoing in Scotland. Other high-profile child sexual crimes involved gangs, including the so-called Beastie House paedophile ring in a Glasgow drugs den. Youngsters were raped and abused at the insect-infected heroin den, described by one victim as the dark and scary Beastie House. Ringleader Ian Owens, then 46, and 6 others were nailed in November 2023 and eventually jailed for a total of 93 years in January 2025. 3 victims under the age of 13 were subjected to horrific sexual abuse over a 7-year period. Ms Gilruth stressed victims will not have to wait until the conclusion of an inquiry for justice, insisting any evidence of ongoing abuse that emerges during the investigation will be reported to the police. The UK government last year announced a grooming gangs public inquiry for the south of the border, and experts had warned that Scotland was not immune. Joni Reid, the Labour MP for East Kilbride and Straven, who has campaigned for a Scottish public inquiry, said, "For months the Scottish Government insisted existing reviews were enough. Survivors were clear they were not. Only an inquiry under the Inquiries Act with full legal powers and real independence would command confidence." Tory children's spokeswoman Ros McCall said,
Finally, we've been calling for a public inquiry on grooming gangs since my colleague Liam Kerr put forward an amendment September last year. And I note the statement draws reference to a sense of urgency shared by the Government, but to be clear, we're only at this point due to the relentless campaigning by the victims' groups and continual questions raised by my Conservative colleagues. We've known for some time that victims have highlighted cross-border trafficking, and it's scandalous that they were not listened to before now. For every day we've been waiting for this inquiry, another victim goes without the justice they deserve.
And campaigning lawyer Amar Anwar said it's shocking that it's taken this long for the Scottish Government to make up its mind in a public inquiry into grooming gangs. Every month, Scotland's high courts are full of horrific and barbaric cases of grooming gangs from all backgrounds who have raped and tortured young women. Yet in so many cases, just as in Rochdale, we as a society must ask the question why our agencies and the justice system ignored what was happening under their own noses.